our world is really like a spider web. And when we touch one part of it, the whole thing can wiggle. And touching one part of it could be eliminating a species from it.
And they dropped a net off a bridge. And he flipped over, slid underneath it, and rolled up. And I was like, oh, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And I was thinking about that when I saw that kayak.
Yeah.
And I went, I'll trade you some of this job for that kayak.
The tug is a drug. I mean, I got the tug, and I was just, I probably set the hook so hard that the fish flew behind us. I have no idea, but I was so excited to put fly tying together with the fly fishing.
Fall in love with the river. Fall in love with disconnecting. Fall in love with the sounds that we're hearing in the background. Connect, and all the fish are the bonus after that. Welcome to the Flyline Podcast, where we enjoy the interesting stories behind the legendary guides and luminaries connected to Maine fishing. I'm Michael Jones. Today, we'll be talking with our special guest, Glenn Grant. Settled within the breathtaking landscape of the Rangeley region of Maine, Grant's Kennebago Camps has long been a cherished symbol of rustic beauty and sporting spirit. At the heart of this enduring tradition is Glenn Grant, a living embodiment of the values and legacy that have defined these historic camps for generations. Glenn's family was responsible for establishing several iconic Maine fishing camps and lodges in the greater Rangeley region, and his connection to Grant's Kennebago camps is deeply personal, tracing back to his forefathers who first established them. While his family no longer owns the camps, Glenn remains deeply connected to their legacy, preserving the stories and traditions that make them an enduring part of Maine's fishing history. From his childhood adventures in the Maine wilderness to capturing its rugged beauty through the lens of his camera, Glenn has built a lifelong relationship with the land, as well as making deep connections with some of the household names connected to the Maine fishing legacy. As a passionate storyteller and advocate for conservation, Glenn continues to honor the legacy of his family by fostering an appreciation for Maine's wilderness and its rich heritage. His dedication to sharing the spirit of these camps and the beauty of the natural world has made him a respected and revered voice in the Maine fly fishing community. It comes with great respect and privilege to welcome our audience to share stories from Glenn's outdoor life. Glenn Grant, welcome to the Flyline Podcast.
Well, Mike, I appreciate you taking the time to give an old man a new lease on life.
I'd love to have the audience hear your story because it's a great one, and I know you're going to tell it well. Glenn, we're sitting up here on Hog Fat Hill. Do I have that correct?
Yep.
How did it get its name?
Well, this used to be the road to the Twin Lake House, which burned. That was up behind us.
We're in Sebago.
Yes. And over the years, the name changed a couple of times. But on the sharp curve that you came up over to get here, about a half mile down the road, that was the home of an abattoir. It was run by a man named Shirley Usher.
Now, for the audience, abattoir is a French term meaning the slaughterhouse.
That's correct. But he did mostly rendering, and he had a big cauldron, evidently, and got the fat and turned it into something useful. And so it became Hog Fat Hill.
Still called that today.
Yeah. And we live high on the hog. There's only one house beyond us. So, yeah, it's a good place to be. Beautiful mountains and scenery. Few neighbors, but good ones. It's a nice little isolated area, but it's getting encroached upon.
I see down the road there's a few house lots going in, and but you own your spot up here. You're up on the perch.
Yep.
Yeah, you and Jackie.
Yep.
Tell me about Jackie.
Oh, you don't have enough time, I'll tell you. Jackie's a marvel. She's a very industrious, hardworking, time management lady that takes care of me as well. We've been together it'll be 34 years in January. I feel very blessed to have her in my life. Jackie was a city girl out of Tacoma Park, Maryland, right next to D.C., and I put her through havoc and hell, getting to know me and my way of life. Yeah, she did everything from learn to go fishing and fly fish and canoe and I took her to Bean Pond, where we owned a camp with a couple of partners for 16 years. The only camp on the pond, built in 1929, up above Roe Pond, south of Carey Pond. And so I've got a canoe, and I'm portaging the canoe. I got to this place where I didn't know which was the best way to go fishing. So I left her with the canoe, and I went bushwhacking to see how to get there. And I was gone quite a while. It was quite a trip. I got back up, and
She was hot.
Yeah, she kind of thought that I'd done that as a test, which I had not. But I guess it was in a way. And that proceeded through the years to putting a pack on her back and one on mine, and going 5/8 of a mile from where we could get the four-wheel drive to get to the pond, get in a canoe or the old rowboat, paddle across the pond, and hike up another 45-degree hill to get to the camp. When we got there, it was all worth it. We always used to take wine and roses. Now, she had a pack that would run 45 to 60 pounds, and I'd have 15 to 20 in mine, but but they were a little lighter coming out and going uphill. That was good. But she's been a tiger, and she's caught some great fish, some huge largemouth bass, beautiful pike, water trout. We caught our last time at the camp before we sold it. We went in, and there was a thunderstorm. Well, it was coming, but we were on the pond the next afternoon after the storm went, and we caught 48 trout that ranged from 6 to 12 inches, and they all went back. The next morning, before we left, I should tell you that the 48 trout were caught in 2 hours and a half. So it was busy.
You got into them.
Oh, we got into them. There was a hatch. And the next day when we went out, we caught 53 trout in less than 2 hours. It was so bad that I actually caught them. My arms were getting tired. I dropped my back cast and caught fish on the back cast. They come at you kind of whop in the back of the head, but it was.
And this is all true.
This is true.
Let's not let truth get in the way of a good story, Glenn.
No. My grandfather, Ed Grant, used to say, in order to tell a good story, you take an absolute fact, even if it's a little one, and keep building on it till it's a good story. But we don't have to, because our experiences have been real. We enjoy life up here. We go to Scarborough regularly, and I'm waiting for ice this year. We have Barker Pond right down the hill from us. We have a lane that goes down to it, as well as the camp road. So we go ice fishing.
So you have a place in Scarborough as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that some family property that you have?
Yes. It was Alquist family and Grant. And my mother married Richard Grant, and they took over the farm, and we had truck farmed and raised animals. So I grew up farming, logging, and doing construction work. My father had an excavation business, and he was also in charge of public works. He was the road commissioner for several years in Scarborough.
Well, those skill sets all came from his lineage, which is to say people that were used to going into the woods and making something.
Yep.
And he came from a long line of people that did that.
Yes, he did.
Let's talk about that.
Well, you figure that his beginnings were his father and mother, and they worked with Wills, my grandfather's father, Ed Grant. They built log homes in the woods from the trees on the lots. They were lucky enough to have cedar in many places there. They made a thriving business out of that. People were willing to pay and to go through a lot of rigors of getting there in order to enjoy their time in the woods. You look back at to Thoreau and what he's done and how he enjoyed it. And that type of education and zeal was evident in the families and not just the Grant family. Several of the camps in the Rangeley region were built by industrious and hardworking people that had a dream and made it happen. And so others could come and enjoy it. And that's still true today.
Immerse themselves in the nature that's been forgotten in Boston and New York City and Philadelphia.
Yep. We used to have in the family at Grant's camps, they used to have the New York Philharmonics bring their families in an arduous way to get there and spend 6 weeks or so. They rehearsed there, and that's how my father and his siblings all got formal music training from the best. And it's a very musical family. But they came there, and that was the cherry on top of their professional cake. And they told it in one of the old logs that I read many years ago. The comments that came from those people were so genuine, and they discovered a world they didn't know.
That's right. I think we all discover a world we don't know when we go deep into the woods of Maine.
Grant's camps was my great-grandfather and grandfather's operation. My grandfather, Will Grant, actually initiated the camps and got Ed Grant, his father, to leave the Beaver Pond camps and come and join him. It was a match made in heaven. My grandfather, Will Grant, my father, Dick Grant, his second oldest son, took me to visit Beaver Pond and Grant's Pond. We went on a buckboard. It was not a choice ride. I got out and walked a lot of the way. It's 12 miles back in there. I just thought to myself, wow, Fly Rod Crosby in the Victorian days and when my great-grandfather was doing it, to go there with a Victorian guide on with a dress that only showed her hobnail shoes that she wore in the woods, to be a sports lady and go through all that. She wanted to catch fish.
What was your great-grandfather like? Did you get to spend much time with him?
No. Died in 1919, so my father was born in 1908, so he was 11.
Yeah.
But I heard so much about him down through the years that it's like I know him.
His name is a thread that runs right through Maine fly fishing history.
Oh, yeah.
I'm thinking maybe even Tim Pond camps. Didn't he have a hand in a lot of those?
Yep. In fact, some of the guides he had went on to build places like Pleasant Island. There used to be a footbridge that went across to the island, which only housed the dining hall.
Where's Pleasant Island?
At Cupsuptic.
Okay, yeah.
But the dining hall burned, and so that was no more. And one of the fellows that was a guide and a cook for Grant's camps got those. My grandfather loaned him some money, and he got the camps. And so we would go there as a treat. And my father would take me up there as many times a year as he could get me there. I would stand on the bridge with my fly rod, which my first fly rod, I had a Wilson rod and an Ocean City reel, a fly line that was nondescript. It was a level D fly line.
Sure. Yeah.
And catgut leader. Monofilament really didn't get hold until late in the 50s. And
What Wilson, was this a cane rod or was it a glass rod? Or was
no, it was a cane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. No, perfect it wasn't. I used to stand on the bridge while they were getting the meal ready and having a drink and everything in the dining hall, and I'd catch anything that came by. It was a perfect spot. I caught fall fish, chubs that were 2.5 pounds, 3 pounds. And so you didn't hoist those up with a bamboo rod. So When I get one of those on, I'd have to go around the bridge and then down onto the rocks, hand line them in, and then let them go from there. And they look like a little tarpon, big scale.
Not just a chub, but a good quality chub.
Yeah. When they take a fly, they actually suck it in. When you learn to wait for that, you get them in the roof of the mouth, and then you can play them. They fight good. And then I'd get the trout, brook trout, and salmon, all from that same hole.
Were there still blueback then at that point, do you think?
There were blueback. I've caught blueback in a couple of ponds in Maine, and
But budding Cupsuptic at that point, were there?
no, they used to wear them. They used to put the weirs out and catch them because they were a favored fish. The Native Americans up there would set weirs, and so would some of the people for winter staples because they were an oily fish, and therefore they smoked well, so they'd keep because refrigeration wasn't a big thing. In fact, at Grant's camps, they held the crew over completely during the year because they logged and cut wood, laid up wood for all the guests, then they cut ice. And the last caribou that was sighted was going across Kennebago Lake in February of 1909. They were doing ice cutting, and the caribou was going across, and there were 5 or 6 wolves chasing it. And, I heard from some of the old-timers about that, and it was a time when the caribou had been devastated because they weren't regulated.
Yeah.
Same as the moose.
Overhunting them, no regulation.
Yep.
Plus all the natural predation.
Yeah, and an interesting thing about fishing in general, it used to be that the sports kept everything they got. If they got 10 trout that were over 4 pounds, they kept them, and they only would keep the biggest one and have Herb Welch or Nash mount them for show. The rest might get eaten, and it might be put in the fertilizer pit. The quote sports of that vintage, 1890 up through 1905 or 10, that was the way they did things.
Yes.
It was like hauling a deer around on the hood of your car or on the fender. It was such a shame. Bill Pierce did a nice article about the loss of the big fish. Now everybody's thrilled if they catch a 4-pounder. I've caught 3 5-pounders in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
One in Kennebago, but they're rare. All of mine went back.
I want to touch on a couple things you said, if you don't mind me asking. I can only imagine that you did meet Herb Welch.
Herb Welch, Herbie.
Right.
He was known as Herbie.
What do you remember about Herb Welch as a person? If you had to describe him as a person.
I'm getting goosebumps.
Well, let's hear about it, yeah.
I was taught to call older people by Mr. and Mrs. or whatever. But Herb Welch, on our first meeting, was at Grant's camps, not at his store. And he bent down, and he's very straight-featured. And he bent down and shook my hand, and he said, "You call me Herbie."
How old do you think you were at that point, Glenn?
8.
That must have been he must have been like a superhero to you.
He was to everybody.
Yeah.
Up there, but he was a gentleman. He was an artist. He was a fly tyer. He
was a national
taxidermist.
National figure artist, right?
Yeah. Well, he studied in Paris.
Yeah.
And he'd also studied in New York. And he taught my Uncle Alden how to paint. But in addition to that, one of his legacies is that he was a world fly casting distance champion. And they started the 100-Footers Club as a result of that. And I don't know if it's still in existence or not, but when I was working as a pro for 444
Cortland, yeah.
Cortland, one of my big things was I could cast right down to the backer. That was 90 feet of line and 15, 20 feet of back burn. And I had shoulders that would hold up. I probably wouldn't, the most I'd cast now would be probably 60 feet. But I often told my sports when we were up and I was doing fly casting demos, which I called line casting demos. It's important to note that line casting is the totally different way from the rest of our fishing that involves casting. Everything else is a weight that's carrying the line, whether it's a plug or a sinker or whatever you have on. That's the way it goes with spinning or spin casting or whatever. And in the terms of fly fishing, the line carries the lure. The way you make it settle on the surface of the water can directly affect your catch, because the fish aren't foolish. They live by their eyes and nose. I thought I'd mention that because it's an important difference in the sport of fly fishing that we love. Therein lies the difference. You're doing things different than all your other forms of fishing. It's so important for people to get out and try it. They think that, oh, I'll never do that. Well, in my demonstrations and when we were doing grand openings for stores, one comes to mind in Amherst, New Hampshire, west of Nashua, for a place called A Place in the Woods, a sports shop. In the carriage depot, they made a pool out of PVC pipe put together with a top laid into it and water in that so that we could cast without damaging the line on the grass and gravel. And so this lady who had never fly fished, her husband was there and he dragged her along, and I loved working with women because they don't have any preconceived notions of what's right or what's wrong. So I ultimately, after going through it with some amount of people, and there were a lot there, there's 60-some that time, I singled her out and I said, "You seem interested. Would you like to try it?" And she said, "Oh, I could." And I said, "Yes, you can." And I proceeded to teach her in a matter of minutes. She caught on, and I said, "Now, this lady's going to show you something that most of you can't do." And she just froze. I said, "Take your rod in the other hand." But I'm right-handed. I said, "Take your rod in the other hand, please." And she did. I said, "Remember, your body is a clock. You want to remember 10 and 2 and then 3 o'clock. That's your cast." She said, "But I'm not left-handed." I said, "Now, hold the line like I showed you right-handed. Just duplicate the same things you did before." I'm telling you, in 2 minutes, that lady could fish either side of a stream. And we actually went fishing at a local river that evening with 5 or 6 of them. They caught brook trout and rainbow that were stalkers in that stream near a golf course, but they caught fish. The reason I'm telling you this is because some of what I've always professed and taught was that stand on a bridge at a stream that looks good and you want to fish. You will look, and on your right, there'll be a path, and it'll be more pronounced than the path on the left side.
It's true.
And the other thing is that most people will fish downstream, and so you go downstream right-handed, and it's just easy fishing. You roll or whatever cast you use according to the circumstance. But all the pools and the undercut banks and so forth are on both sides of the river as it winds down through. And there's places that just don't get fished. So if you can fish left-handed, you go down the other side, and I swear to you, with a little practice, you will catch more fish, strictly because They're unadulterated.
That's right.
You know.
That's great, Glenn.
And anyway, that's something my father taught me to fish and to swing an axe and a bat and a hammer with both hands. He said, you got to learn to do it in case you break one on the other.
Is there anything else about, we started this off with Herb Welch. Is
Yeah.
there anything else you wanted to share about Herb Welch?
Yes. Herb Welch actually died in October of my senior year in 1960.
Let me ask you about somebody else.
Yeah.
Carrie Stevens.
Oh, yeah.
You met Carrie Stevens.
Oh, yes.
Now, what was she like? I know what she did. You don't need to tell me about the fish and the flies.
She was quiet. She wasn't outgoing, but outgoing enough so that she was able to do things. And my grandfather, Will Grant, bought more flies from her, kept her going in the cottage industry. And the sports loved it. There were different ones like Dr. Burke from Beverly, Massachusetts, and these different sports that came repeatedly.
Mm-hmm.
Then bring their own hooks that they favored. Might be a Carlisle, might be a Kirby. She would tie her flies on those hooks they preferred. Rangeley didn't have a big supply of hooks and fly tying materials. Some of the fly tying materials were shot locally, ducks and grouse and so forth. Carrie Stevens I marveled at her. She tied a fly for me at Little Boy Falls.
That's
on
the
Megalloway.
upper Megalloway, yeah?
Yeah, just above Palmachini. But she tied all her flies between her fingers. She didn't have a vise nor want a vise. And I gave away a stream side that she did for me at Little Boy Falls. I gave it to either the Saco River Salmon Club or the National Wild Turkey Federation, which I belonged to both. I gave it years ago and had given some others, and they should have been part of the patchwork of our Grant family history. She was a fisherman too.
Yeah.
She didn't get the notoriety of Fly Rod Crosby, but Fly Rod Crosby didn't get the notoriety of Carrie Stevens, tying the fly.
That's right.
In fact, there was a gray ghost fly that was on the card by Carrie Stevens that was auctioned off at an angler's marketplace, probably April or May, and it went for $1,590. Carrie would be rolling in revelry if she ever had a fly that she knew achieved that much money. And there are others that have gone that
They're
high.
going to go up in value,
Yeah.
Glenn. To some people, they spend $1,500 like you and I buy a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
don't drink coffee. I'm really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And Carrie Stevens died in 1970. She was a whiz. She had built herself into a national person of fame in fly tying. She had classes and that she taught fly tying in, and they were well attended. I think she did some in Farmington, but I know she did them locally to Rangeley till she got so frail she couldn't do it. I think I read that she discontinued doing it a few years prior to her death. Her husband was a guy. He was a well-noted guy, Wally.
Did you ever meet Wallace?
No,
No?
he was never home. She came to the camps and so forth, but when we went fishing, my father was the guide, and we took the road over through by Big Falls and up through on the Megalloway to Little Boy Falls, because the fish start gathering up there, some to spawn and leap the falls, and that's quite a sight up there.
You're up above Parmachini.
Yeah. Little Boy Falls isn't that big a set of falls, and so you see the salmon, and they go up over it 3 steps, bing, 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 but they don't always get it the first time.
And you guys brought Carrie there.
Yeah, and that's when she did my stream side tie that I lament giving away. She was a good person, and as she was modest and sometimes shy, depending on the company she was in, but other times she was not shy. She had a ball. She would tease my grandfather and vice versa. That was fun to see, even as a youngster. I said, that's pretty good, because my grandfather was bigger than most as far as stature goes.
So, Glenn, I understand that you were one of a few people that could probably still tell a story about Gad.
Gad Gaddis did us a great favor with his series, The Flying Fisherman. I think he did it for Liberty Mutual, if I recall. He was a barnstorm pilot, you know. He could take that little Cessna. He had a Piper Cub with shallow draft pontoons on it, and then he had a Piper Cub, a Cessna, with more horsepower to get out of trouble in some places. But he showed the world, unlike Lee Wolf, who was born of money and had the ability to fly and get around, he went to places that most of us could only dream of. Gadabout went to places like that sometimes, but he went mostly to places that you and I could access and have the fishing. When we'd get together at Thompson's restaurant on the day of the buffet, that was a Tuesday.
This is Thompson's in Bingham, by the way.
Yeah. Thompson's restaurant. I used to kid him. I said, you did the fishing world a favor because you caught more small fish on television than anybody in the world. And he says, yes, I guess I did, but I had fun doing it. And
what was he like as a guy?
He was a good guy. I said, when are you going to retire? And he had a classic answer for that. He says, retire? Retire from what? He says, I love what I do, so it's not work. He was a gentleman. He loved, when he had the opportunity to share some of his stories and stuff with young people, he'd do it. And nobody ever told him, well, Gadabout, you got to go. It's time to go, because he was in control. And to tell you what a gentleman he was, there was a lawsuit brought to his company for a filming situation where his right-hand person, his girl Friday, was hurt. And she put in a claim because she was out of work for some time. And he actually appeared as a witness on her behalf against his own company and sponsor, so that she got
compensation.
Thank you. Yeah, compensation for what happened to him. And that ultimately caused kind of a rift, as you would expect, with the sponsor, but they got through it. That's why he was off the air for a while, but then back on because somebody else picked up on it.
How did you meet Gadabout Gaddis?
I met him because he found out my name was Grant. It was at a sportsman show. It was the one in Worcester, Mass. I was doing fly casting demonstrations along with others that were there. And when they announced my name and what I was trying to teach, and I was professing that if you had to learn one cast for a fly, it would be the roll cast, because you can apply it to every bit of water that you'll ever get on. They introduced me as Glenn Grant from Maine, known as the Maine Man, and I came down the stairs, and Dave Whitlock was going up the stairs because he was on next. Gadabout was there, and he was signing autographs and stuff. And he says, Mr. Grant, he said, are you related to the Grants at Grant's Camps? I said, yes. I said, Will Grant was my grandfather. He says, your grandfather was a good man. And I said, thank you for saying that. I'm already aware. So we started then, and then he told me about that he was in Maine most of the time in those days.
Did you ever fish with him?
I fished with him. He gave me a rod, as a matter of fact, a gadabout Gaddis rod that was made by Shakespeare. I still have it. I wished it had been a fly rod, but it was a casting rod. I fished with him on the Kennebec right there in Solon. That was the only rod he had with him, other than his own fly rod. I'd have gladly exchanged mine with him. But, I fished with him. We got a couple of rainbows and some smallmouth bass. Then he invited me over to Emden Pond. But I had to leave camp and go back to Scarborough in a hurry because my mother had a health issue.
But you did get to fish with him.
Yeah, I got to fish with him, but I got to talk about fishing with him several times. I met him when he first got back to Emden from Florida in the winter. He loved catching bonefish. And Bill Pierce is a bonefish nut, too.
And I have too.
Oh,
Well, I'm a nut. We're going for 2 weeks in April, yeah. Sherry and I. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, have you ever caught a bonefish?
Yes.
So you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my most fun was I got into a bunch of 15 to 30 pound tarpon on a fly.
Perfect size.
Up in the rivers.
That's all you want. Yeah.
Oh, my Lord.
Gadabout did that too.
I'd meet with him and we'd do the buffet at Thompson's on the Tuesdays when he got back. And then the Tuesdays before he left to go down to stay with his niece in Scarborough and then go to Florida, they were his caregivers. I got up to Bam at 10:30 in the morning. I was going to meet him for the buffet lunch. I went to check on him and found out. They said, "Oh, haven't you heard? Gadabout died this morning, 9:30. He was in the elder care home there. That's where he wanted to be." And my heart just sank.
Did he live a full life?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He did several things. He was an insurance man. He called himself a huckster. Coming through the Depression and everything, he had to do several things just to get by. He wasn't born with money. He told me he wished he'd written and recorded more books in simple form that were affordable for youngsters to read, which is, it's like you and I.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, he was a good man.
So let's bring up another name for you. Ted Williams.
Yeah, Ted was quite a boy. He was tall, about 6'3", I'd say.
You remember how you first met?
Yes, yeah. I met him on 4 occasions, and one of them was, looking back at it, was a real thriller because he used to go to my grandfather's camps.
And this would be Grant's camps.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But my grandfather no longer owned them.
Oh.
Nick Morrison had bought them from him. They were sold a couple of times. But anyway, my grandfather was brought back to manage them, trying to get the clientele back. And, so.
That's a very common story.
Yeah.
In Maine sporting. People don't realize that. I've heard that story. So what you're saying, Glenn, is that some new blood comes in, buys the camp, but the reality is all the legacy customers that have been staying there, maybe they don't like the new guy as much as they like the old guy.
The new guys
They don't like the menu.
They didn't know the characters that were providing their income. That's obvious, as you say. I've seen it happen in so many, and my grandfather got an award for bringing the most commercial tourism into Rangeley region.
Maybe at that point, Ted Williams came.
Yeah, Ted Williams came before he went to Korea, and he came afterwards. So I got to meet him before he went to Korea because I won the flycasting championship at Portland Expo, the sportsman show.
You did.
I did.
Yeah.
And I wasn't that tall. He got down. My father was a big man, but only 6'1.5", and Ted Williams was the Splendid Splinter. And he was tall and thin. And Bud Levitt gave him the name the Splendid Splinter.
The Splendid Splinter.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And they were chums and did commercials together in later life. But I had won that contest for Maine, which set me up to go to the New Englands, which was at the Boston Camping Show. We went down, my father took me down, and they had the big pool laid out so the Ted could demonstrate the casting and everything, and then they put out 3 what looked to be like a wheelbarrow inner tube, and then another one, and then another one in graduated sizes. And big one was in the first one you had to take and drop your fly in there, no more than 2 false casts. So did that. There were 6 kids there, all New Englanders. And I did that one. Then I was the only one that got the last one. And that was funny because when he got the microphone to get up there, he says, "I know you." He says, "You're from Maine." "Yeah." "You're a Grant." "Yeah." "You won in Maine." "Yeah." I was really vocal, you know.
Yeah, short answers. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, you must have been a little awestruck, and you know who you were talking to.
Oh, yeah. Well, my grandfather on my mother's side and I listened to the Boston Red Sox on the transatlantic radio from the time I was knee-high. I knew who he was big time. Later on, when I was 13 or 14, which would have been, I was born 42, so we'll say it's 56. He was back from Korea and back playing ball. And we met him to go smelting in South Yarmouth at what was Reddy's Diner. It became the Muddy Rudder, and now it's just closed. But that was an all-night diner, right on the truck route.
Yep, we all know it.
A rustic.
Yeah.
You know. And so we met there, had a bite to eat, been driven up, and then we took him to Muddy Brook in Falmouth, and then Joe's Brook in South Freeport, and to go smelting. And you had to catch them with your hands. You couldn't use them there.
Jack smelt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he wanted the small ones to take control with up to Rangeley. And the big ones we took to eat.
Sure.
And he was really surprised because all we had was big old D battery lights, and they didn't last long. And so we'd be there from 10 o'clock at night until dawn, and your lights would fail. So we always got in the vehicle and went over to LL Beans because they were open at night. You could buy batteries and get free coffee. The only 2 people on the floor were Mr. Bean himself, LL Bean, Leon, and a guy by the name of Eno, who had been there forever as a shoemaker. They were over just one light going over the place where the cash register was. You would not recognize this place by today's standards. We got the batteries and everything and wandered over and started. I saw Mr. Bean look
surprised.
He was dumbfounded, and I knew him. He was involved with Scouts, and so was I. His son, Leon Gorman, who took over the business ultimately, was in Scouts as well. And so I went on and said, "Mr. Bean, I'd like you to meet Ted Williams." He put his hand out in about 3 stages.
He put his hand out in 3 stages.
Yeah, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
And he wasn't sure he believed it. So that cost us some time smelting.
That was the beginning of a long conversation.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. But
Did you ever have Ted come up to the cams on the lake?
No. I wasn't at the camps when he was, but he would go up there, yes.
Yeah.
The second time that we did it was the next year, same thing, met at Reddy's, went and did smelting. Only this time we took my cousin Gary with me.
Mm-hmm.
My father's youngest sister, Janice, was Gary's mother. He's the only first cousin that didn't have the name of Grant. There was Alden Grant, Glenn Grant, and Bill Grant, William Dexter, after my grandfather. But yeah, we got to know each other. And he was gracious. Dad was straightforward, but he had a grace. You never hear about that. But in the company of fly fishermen and hunters, he was a good guy. And not like the temperamental person that couldn't hit more than 416 and still holds the record.
Right. Or sighting his deer rifle at Fenway Park.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He brought me 2 home run balls. And I asked him at the time, that one was signed by the whole team. And I said, boy, it must have been something. Somebody, a fan, catch that and give it back to you. He says, that's not the way it works, son. He says, our batting practice, we have bat boys up in the stands, and they catch them and bring them back to us. They have them in baskets and bring them back to us, and then we sign them because it was an actual home run ball, but it wasn't taken away from the fan.
Right.
And so that was good.
Glenn, let's take a quick break. I want to come back and I want to talk about this part of your life that we haven't talked about, because I think you've got some stories to tell me about maybe photography and some other things you were doing.
Yeah.
In this Flyline flashback, we explore the story of the Dickey Lincoln Project, a monumental hydroelectric proposal that never came to fruition. Planned for the upper St. John River in northern Maine during the mid-20th century, this ambitious project aimed to construct 2 massive earthen-filled dams to generate power and provide flood control. Authorized by Congress in 1965, the project envisioned a 330-foot-tall Dickey Dam, stretching over 10,000 feet, and an 85-foot-high Lincoln School Dam spanning 1,600 feet. Together, they would have flooded 88,000 acres of forest and streams, significantly altering the region's ecosystem and displacing local communities. Initially estimated at $219 million, the project's cost ballooned to over $900 million, fueling mounting opposition. Environmental groups like the Natural Resources Council of Maine spearheaded efforts to halt the project, highlighting its devastating ecological impact. Their advocacy, combined with escalating costs and dwindling political support, led to Congress defunding the project on December 16, 1981. The defeat of the Dickey Lincoln Initiative marked a turning point in Maine's environmental history, preserving the natural beauty and ecological integrity of the St. John River. Today, the St. John River remains a haven for natural and outdoor recreation, serving as a testament to the power of environmental stewardship. The story of the Dickey Lincoln Project reminds us of the importance of protecting natural resources for future generations. And now, back to the second half of this episode. Glenn, I want to talk to you more about photography.
Oh, yeah. I have some negative thoughts, but we'll see what develops. So, yeah, I loved photography.
What got you inspired to get into photography?
Being in the woods.
But did you know which end of the camera to look through? And
Yeah. My first camera was a 127 Brownie. I carried that to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania in 1957. I got it before that a few years and took pictures up to camp, fish we'd gotten and stuff like that. I carried it to the Boy Scout National Jamboree in 1957 at Valley Forge, and I took a gazillion pictures. I took 15 rolls of film and I burned them all. There were 58,000 plus boys and leaders there, and it was quite a show. as bad as we had it tending there, you couldn't imagine how bad George Washington's crew had it at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the brownie, you would know this, but I'm just going down memory lane. You remember Boys Life magazine?
Yep.
Did they used to have the opportunity for you to buy certain things? Like you could have bought a fly rod, you could have maybe bought a brownie camera.
In the back of Boys Life magazine,
Right.
there were advertisements that consisted of everything from jackknives and sheath knives and cameras, canteens, and even cook stoves and things like that. And then an outfit called Cloverine Salve had merit programs where if you sold so much Cloverine Salve, you could get something from their list of goodies, and they had a big list. So yeah, anybody that was industrious or had a big family they could tap, you could get stuff, and I did. But I got the camera was a Christmas present or a birthday present from my parents the years before.
Mm-hmm.
Being in the woods and on the waters was all the subject matter I needed. I mean, and it made you learn. When I was doing all the sports shows representing sporting products, I often would take a display that I made and put out 8 by 10 pictures of wildlife shots or woodlore shots, and I'd have them available right there that they could buy just the print, or they could buy a print with a mat that they chose. I carried like 150 mats, and if they wanted that, that was another price, and if they wanted it framed and matted, I had frames there, and it would pay for my booth space.
Right.
And the booth space would be $350 to $400. And you couldn't do that by representing products that weren't for sale. So it made sense to me to do it. It didn't take away from the other products. So
Kind of a side hustle.
yeah, it was, and it worked. And the most famous of the photos that I took was a pair of moose antlers where an industrious moose that was sick of having them dangle rammed a dead standing fir tree, and the two palms landed opposite the tree, almost equidistant, and they were covered with moss. They were from the year before. They were this green, and the outline was all there, and the dead fir tree, and I didn't prop that picture at all. All I did was break one weed that was right smack dab in the center, because I had an autofocus and I knew it was going to take a picture of the weed when I took the picture. That was with a waterproof Nikon that I carried for years. But
you could, it told the story of what had happened a year before.
yeah,
Yeah. Any casual observer would say a moose shed those antlers by banging against that tree.
and I found it rather odd that the people that were attracted to those pictures were the ones that never got in the woods with their husbands and so forth. The ladies bought the pictures. Probably 3 out of 5 pictures were sold to ladies who may or may have not stepped into the woods.
Tell us about the trip you had up at Baxter, maybe with a moose.
Yeah. My cousin Clarence and I were fishing over to Grassy Pond, and we crossed over to get to the far side of the brook from where we were, which was higher ground, and looked up, and there's a cow moose with twin calves coming down through and a long way from us. And I had the camera, but no camera bag or anything. I just had it around my neck. And we had our fly rods. And so I said, I think she's coming to where all the lilies and stuff that they've uprooted are against the earthen dam here. But it was all green. It's quite a banquet that was set. And they kept coming down, and as they got closer, I kept snapping pictures. And then finally I said, Clarence, I'm going across the way because I think that I can get better pictures with the light from over there. And I sat there. I had my back up against the tree and my legs out onto that earthen dam area. And she looked me over and she let the calves, one was on each side of her. And
Was she bothered by you?
no. I just kept talking to her. And she let the calves come right over to me, closer and closer.
She never put her ears back or anything.
No,
Yeah.
didn't drop her ears. Didn't they'll sometimes make a slurping sound when they're upset, but they drop their lower lip and make a sound that says "go away." No, she stayed right where she was until they both came over, and the one stayed behind the other. The one was more curious than the other, and they came up, and I got pictures of them right there. I got a picture of one of them sniffing my boot, and then I went for the next picture, and nothing happened, and went out of film.
Yeah.
And both of them came up and were right there, and my legs aren't that long, and she was the cow was from here, maybe 12 feet away, and so I just kept talking to him and so forth, and calm voice, and ultimately she starts to paddle off. She went out, around, went up to the banking, and then they went down the same side of the brook that we were going to go down fishing. So after that, we went down and caught trout for supper, and it was just a marvelous day. And I don't know whether I could have, if I had a film with me, if I could have gotten away with it, because it was an automatic camera, Nikon waterproof, and no lenses on it, just a 35 millimeter. And I don't know if I could have loaded a camera and had them stay there or not.
Added more film.
Yeah.
No, probably not.
No. But if I had the camera that I use nowadays, I could have had their eyeball up the full size of the picture.
Yeah, but you have this image preserved in your mind.
Yeah, I got so many of those.
Glenn, I want to ask you another question. I know just from guiding in Maine and being up in the Rangeley area a lot, that there's a lot of rumor about brown trout in Big Kennebago Lake.
And they're there.
What do you know about it?
There was a question as to how they got there. And the most credible reason I've come to believe is that sometimes the hatchery fish get mixed. At one time, they had their own hatchery up there, trying to bring the fishery back. And I believe that the brown trout were either by intent or by mistake came by way of the hatchery that was there. And they've caught, there's one on the wall at the main lodge at Grant's Camps that a fellow caught. I think it was in the area of 8 or 8.5 pounds. Mm-hmm. Good fish.
Yeah.
The people up there, realizing they were losing the fishery in the early 1900s, decided they had to do something to bring it back. The hatchery was an attempt to do that.
They were destroying the fishery.
Some would say they had already destroyed it.
Right.
When I was less than 10 years old, we were up hunting. My father took me up there. I went fishing like 3 times from the spring to the fall, and we'd go up and hunt birds and then deer. There was a gazillion rabbits. I couldn't believe the snowshoe hare that were up there. We were going along Kennebago Stream, walking towards Little Kennebago, and I looked at the stream. I don't think it was 20 feet across at that point, and shallow. The thing was writhing with big fish, rolling and bumping.
What time of year was this?
This was November, the first week of November.
So they were spawning.
They were certainly trying to.
Yeah.
And my father said, you know, if you were really good, you could walk across the stream on their backs. And I never saw her. And I saw that man catch an 8-pound brook trout. And I can't tell you where, but it was in Kennebago.
Yep.
And a 6.5-pound brook trout.
Yep.
Show them to me, weigh them on a set of English scales, and put them back. That was my lesson. You want something to eat, it's going to be 6 to 10 inches long.
Yeah, put the big ones back.
Put the big ones back.
Most important fish to leave.
Yeah, they have very few predators at that time. I want to say something that people, including biologists that I went to school with, have a hard time understanding. But our wading birds, like the great blue heron, the mergansers, some of the others that get into the water, they're all shallow water waders. And when they wade in areas that were spawn areas, sand or gravel, they're rough scales. If you've ever felt the leg on a heron,
Sure, yeah.
they transport eggs, and they land in the same type of place that they picked them up. So I don't blame all the fish that have gotten into different lakes. I don't blame just guys that brought them back from Canada or stuff like that. That just making the trip, even in the sponsons, they just don't do well.
You know, Glenn, I agree with you 100%. It just seems like if you watch the smallmouth bass line move, they would show up 55 miles from somewhere else with no connection between the two.
Absolutely.
If some guy in a glitter bass boat was keeping them in the live well, it's almost like you just watch that line creep every 4 or 5 years, 10 years. All of a sudden, Umbagog Lake, Belgrades. Belgrades has had smallmouth in it forever. And then the other thing about smallmouth is the state encouraged people to stock them in your lifetime. Do you remember back when they were encouraging people to stock fish?
Yeah.
That was probably after the 20s and 30s. They were like, hey, anything goes, boys. We got to make the fishing better.
They.
Am I saying that right?
Yes, you are, because it was a commercial endeavor.
Yeah.
They wanted a lot of fish to be able to be caught, and it didn't matter what they were. So they took a prolific fish. Now, the black crappies, all right? Black crappie and white crappie. The origin of that stocking was, as far as I know, there was a place that had them in a private pond.
Down around Southern Sebago area.
Yeah. South of, down the Shapley area.
Shapley, sorry.
Balch Pond in that area. During one of the big storms, the feeble little dam that they had holding them back, they got out. Now, I used to know the name of the little pond and the outfit that ran it, but they had put crappie in there because they liked them as a panfish. And in the next 3 years, they were in several of those ponds and got into the Ospey River, and it went on from there.
We catch them on the Androscoggin now.
Yeah, but it's really neat because I was disgusted with clear cutting and the erosion that came from it with nothing to hold it back coming down from a hard winter or a big rain and hitting the streams. And up in Bingham, I took pictures of the different fungi that came up around the stumps and stuff. There's difference between what shows up from the base of a hardwood or a softwood. And some of the most beautiful things. I mean, it's like looking, if you've ever been underwater as a diver and seen coral, it's like coral and beautiful, bright orange colors, bright yellows, mottled brown.
And when you clear cut, you lose all that because it just gets baked in the sun, and all that biodiversity is living underneath that canopy that no longer exists, and it's in jeopardy.
Yeah, there are other replacements, but not the same. And you don't see the songbirds. I used to revel in a couple of things on Johnson Mountain up to Bingham. I'd sit on top of the ledges up there and watch the ravens teaching their offspring how to kite and how to work the loft up and down and their calls, and they have quite a language. But that was one thing I missed, but that same stretch of woods, before it was cut, there'd be flocks of grosbeaks, crossbills that would come in.
Warblers, yeah. You'd hear birds from all, yeah.
That they'd hit the cones, and as they worked through in a flock, it sounded like rain with the petals falling out of the cones. So it was marvelous, and I wish that I'd recorded it because it would have been very obvious. People would think it was raining.
I think that's what makes places like the Rapid River and places like Upper Dam and Kennebago and Parmacini so magical, is that you still see that fully intact wildlife right along the river's corridors, where it just is never, or it hasn't seen an axe in 100 years.
I had the luxury of seeing a lot of the Parmacini region up through to Upper and Lower Black Ponds and Deer Pond and the Bowman Town area. I could get to it from our camp at Parmacini. I had the luxury of seeing things that were still intact. However, in the years that followed, down it came, and they'd leave a 50-foot margin of trees, so you didn't see the devastation that went on behind it. My grandfather owned a huge piece of land that went all the way over to the eastern shore of Parmacini.
Oh, wow, that's a big piece of land then.
Yeah, there was, I think, 15,000 acres. I just wished it held on to 500 acres on the shore for me. But I don't have those records in my head, only here. So,
well, I have some good news to report to you.
What's that?
Colleague of mine was able, with the help of some other people of interest, to preserve most of that land inside of Kennebago and gave it to the Rangeley Heritage Trust to remain forever wild.
I read that in the Highlander, and that is good news.
That's right.
I hope they get to do more of it. There's so many precious places in that area, and as nice as camps are everywhere, it's nice to have some areas that won't be built on. The wildlife doesn't have a say. You get a say for them.
That's right.
The same thing goes with ponds. Unfortunately, people bring problems, whether it's sulfates or whatever they bring with them, common soaps going into the water, any number of things can disturb what we've got. There's no getting it back in many cases. So that is good news.
Let's talk about the autumn of your life. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. You're not 50 years old anymore.
You're right.
What are your reflections these days about a life well lived?
I've been blessed right across the board. My vocations prior took me to places that I would never have gotten to. I was lucky to win a few contests as a youngster. I was state champion indoor small bore rifle hunting and fishing. I was turned loose to hunt on our property by myself at age 8. I saw a deer, but I didn't get one until I was 9.
Oh, you remember all this stuff now?
Every bit of it. Tell you the gun I used and everything. I got a 22 for my 5th birthday. I got a 25 Stevens long for my 6th birthday. I got a Winchester Model 92 half magazine 4440 for my 7th birthday.
So by the time we get to your 70th birthday, you got an M60 mounted on top of a Jeep.
I actually have a very large cannon in the.
Do you have a cannon?
Yes, a small one. No, my reflections are so many, it's mind-boggling. And we were in a bad accident in 2013.
What happened?
I tried pushing over an oak tree about 55 miles an hour. The Oak One. We both got smashed up, and
You and Jackie?
yes,
Yeah.
we're lucky to be here. We came back from an antique show, a sale over at Cumberland Fairgrounds. After that, on the way home, and went to Cole Farms for twin lobster rolls, and they have the same ingredient as turkeys because I fell asleep at the wheel on the way home. Luckily, didn't take out anybody else except us.
You dodged a bullet.
Yeah, I've been living in a recliner ever since. And she was very fortunate. She ended up with a plate in her knee and several broken parts, and broken vertebrae in her neck. And we had quite the session, but we both got through it. And I did well until I fell through a ladder November 8th last year and did more damage to my lower spine. So now I walk with two canes, and I always wanted a toucan, but they're illegal to import. So,
Like the parrot.
yeah,
Yeah.
pretty though.
Glenn, it means everything that you took the time to sit down and share your stories with our audience and myself. It's wonderful to have you on. You have so many wonderful stories to tell. This could go on for 2 or 3 podcasts, I'm sure of it. But I wanted to take the opportunity to capture your family story, your family legacy, and your legacy. And it means everything that you took the time to do that with me today. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Mike.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us for this intimate discussion. And thank you for listening to Flyline Podcast. A new Flyline Podcast episode will be released every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. So be sure to come back to meet our next famous guest. Until then, this is Michael Jones, and we invite you to visit the blog section of our website to enjoy photos and contributions from our guests and experience all of our episodes at flylinepodcast.com.